Hello everyone, and welcome to my RootsTech Connect presentation, Understanding X-chromosome DNA Matching. The content of this video, as well as the thoughts, views, and opinions expressed herein, belong solely to me as the creator and do not necessarily reflect the views of FamilySearch International and RootsTech. This presentation is going to cover the basics of X-chromosome DNA inheritance. I'm going to talk about which testing companies provide X-DNA data. We'll go over the differences between matches on the X chromosome and on autosomal chromosomes, known as autosomes. We'll also talk about how to use the fact you share X-DNA with a match to help narrow down and identify the connection between you. I'll give you a few tips to set yourself up to succeed with X-DNA, and we'll end with a couple of short case study examples. So let's begin by talking about the four types of DNA. There's autosomal DNA, the most popular test out there. We inherit 50% of that from each parent in the form of 22 pairs of autosomes or autosomal chromosomes, and it covers all of our ancestral lines. Then there's mitochondrial DNA. This is inherited by both men and women, but passed down only by a mother to all of her children. So it covers the direct maternal line, the mother's line. And don't confuse it with X chromosome DNA. They're two very different types of DNA with different pathways. Then there are the two sex or gender defining chromosomes, the Y chromosome and the X chromosome. The Y chromosome is male only and passed from father to son down a direct male line. So it looks at the father's line. And the X chromosome is the other sex chromosome, and it's our focus today. So let's look at its unique inheritance patterns in more depth. The most important thing you need to understand about X chromosome inheritance is that women inherit two X chromosomes. One from each parent, one from their father, one from their mother. But men only inherit one X chromosome, and it comes from their mother. They instead get a Y chromosome from their father. And this is what these chromosomes look like. Here's a male set of chromosomes. Chromosomes 1 to 22, the autosomes. As you can see, they come in pairs, one from each parent. And then there's chromosome pair number 23, the sex or gender defining chromosomes. For a man, it's the X and Y as shown here. For a woman, the two X's. And one thing to point out is that the X chromosome is significantly larger than the Y chromosome, about 3 times larger, in fact. And that means that we all get a little bit more DNA from our mothers than we do our fathers. So how does it all work? Well, let's look at the different X-DNA inheritance patterns, gender to gender, starting with male to female. So here's Dad. He's got an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. And if he has a daughter, he simply passes down the one X chromosome he has direct from his mother to his daughter. It's unrecombined. He only has one to pass down. What about male to male? Well, that is simply not possible. Here's Dad again. He's got his X and Y. If he has a son, that's male to male, he passes down a Y chromosome. There is no X-DNA inheritance male to male at any point. Female to female, well, here's Mum, and she's got her two X chromosomes, one from her father, a paternal X, and one from her mother, a maternal X. And when she has any children, gender is not a factor, male or female. Here, she's having a daughter. She generally will pass down a recombined version of her chromosomes. So she'll pass down one brand new X chromosome with pieces from both of her X chromosomes. In this case, the daughter got a very large segment from the maternal X chromosome and a smaller piece from the paternal X chromosome. And this is what we call recombination. Female to male, the very same thing. Like I say, the gender isn't important here when a woman is passing it down because she's always going to pass down an X. But in this case, the son got a different mix. And there's always the possibility of no recombination. The mother might, in some rare cases, pass down an entirely unrecombined one of her two chromosomes. In this case, the son got the paternal X chromosome unrecombined. So now that we've talked about the inheritance patterns, let's talk about where you can test your X chromosome. And unlike Y DNA, there is no separate test for X chromosome DNA. It's instead included with autosomal DNA tests. And you'll notice I have a little star there because there are caveats. So there are a number of major testing companies that provide autosomal tests. Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, FamilyTree DNA, and Living DNA all sell autosomal DNA tests, which include the testing of the X chromosome. But only 2 of them actually provide data to testers. So 23andMe and FamilyTree DNA, if you test at those 2 companies, you will get xDNA matching data. However, Ancestry, MyHeritage, and Living DNA do not provide any X data. So if you test at those 3 companies and you want to see xDNA matching, you have to either retest at one of the others, or you can upload your raw data to FamilyTree DNA to see X matching, or to the third-party website GEDmatch, which also has xDNA comparison capabilities. So let's move on now to xDNA matching. And let's talk about the differences between X chromosome DNA and autosomal DNA segments. Always look out for autosomal matches who also share on the X chromosome with you. If you have someone who's on both, it's going to help you narrow down the connection. Segments on autosomal chromosomes can come from any of your lines, but X segments can be narrowed down due to the unique inheritance patterns. The recombination rate is lower for xDNA segments, but the false positive rate is higher. So be very careful of small matches on the X chromosome, especially female to female matches. Any lines in your tree with 2 males in a row, as we've seen, can be eliminated from your research if there's a decent xDNA match, because there is no male-to-male xDNA transmission. And lines that alternate male-female, skip the recombination on the male generation. So common ancestors are often going to be further back in time, and more xDNA can be inherited from more distant ancestors than ever is the case with autosomal segments. It's essential to take the gender of the testers being compared into account when it comes to xDNA matches. An X match between 2 men, for instance, means the connection can be narrowed down to the maternal side for both of them, whereas an X match between a man and a woman, while the connection can be narrowed down to the maternal side for the man, it cannot for the woman, although many other lines can be discounted, as you'll see. And an X match between 2 women is the scenario that can be narrowed the least. But again, there are still lines that can be discounted. What I want to show you are some xDNA inheritance charts created by Dr. Blaine Bettinger and viewable on his website. This is a male version, and all of the ancestors highlighted in blue and pink could have contributed to this man's X chromosome. Now, it doesn't mean all of them will have, but they could have, whereas all of the ancestors highlighted in white could not. They are on those male-to-male transmission lines, including his entire paternal side. Now, looking at this fan chart, it goes back to the 5th great grandparent level, where we all have 128 5th great grandparents. If someone is an xDNA match to you and you're a male, you only need to take into account 21 out of those 128 5th great grandparents for the connection. That massively narrows down the research you need to do and where you need to look on your tree. It's very similar for the female xDNA inheritance chart, but of course, as a woman has 2 X chromosomes, there are more possibilities and more xDNA ancestors. However, there are still many that can be discounted, especially the maternal grandfather, etc. And if we look back to the 5th great grandparent level, there are 34 lines for a woman to take into account out of the 128. So there are still a large number we can eliminate from our search. My top tip and first step when working with xDNA matches is to get yourself prepared. Set yourself up to succeed by filling out an xDNA table for yourself with your direct ancestors who you could have inherited xDNA from, and use this as a reference to consult whenever you have a new X-DNA match, as it can aid you in working out the connection, and it's going to focus your search on the correct lines and eliminate those lines which could not have contributed to your X chromosome or chromosomes. And my top recommendation for an X-DNA inheritance chart to fill out for yourself is the charts on the genealogyjunkie.net website run by Sue Griffiths. She has modified inheritance charts created by Debbie Parker Wayne, and you can download them in a number of formats, both male and female charts as well. And here is my filled out version. All I have done is add my direct ancestors to the blue and pink boxes, and now I have a fantastic reference to use for any new X-DNA matches. I know now that they can only match me via these particular ancestors. And this is the female focus person chart. Always make sure when you download the chart to fill out that you pick the correct gender chart for the person you're filling it out for. Let's look at a couple of examples now. And this is an X-match example on Family Tree DNA, one of the sites which does report X chromosome data. And on the main match list, there is an X-match column, which shows us which matches share on the X chromosome and which don't. But we have to be extremely careful with this information from Family Tree DNA because they take into account very tiny segments from 1 centimorgan and above. And my top tip is to always look at these matches in the chromosome browser to see if they're truly worth investigating, if they're of a decent size or not. In this case, we're looking at a match named Ruth, and it tells us the longest block is 14. And that's another thing to take into account with Family Tree DNA. Any centimorgans shared on the X chromosome will not be added to the shared centimorgan total or taken into account in terms of the longest block. But we will be able to see the information in the chromosome browser. So let's go have a look at that chromosome browser. And we can see that Ruth and I share a very decent looking segment on the X chromosome. The key thing you want to look at, however, is the detailed segment data table, which gives us the numbers. And it tells me that we share 35 centimorgans on the X chromosome. So that's a really decent amount of DNA. And there is that longest block on the autosomal chromosome number 10, rounded up to 14. So always check X matches on FTDNA in the chromosome browser to see if they're worth investigating. An X match should be at least 15 centimorgans for men and over 20 for women before you can be relatively sure they're a genuine match and worth investigating. In this case, Ruth is worth investigating, so let's go do it. The first thing I want to do is look at the shared match list, which is known as In Common With on Family Tree DNA. And this is interesting more for what I don't see on the list than what I do. My mother isn't there. So this matches on my paternal X chromosome, and my paternal X chromosome came entirely from my paternal grandmother. If we look at my paternal X DNA inheritance chart, which I filled out for reference, we can see I got 100% of that X chromosome from my paternal grandmother, Margaret McPherson Campbell. Now, I might have got 50% from each of her parents, but be very careful with these guidance percentages here. As we've seen earlier on, the recombination process is not as neat as that. I might have got 80% from her father, 20% from her mother, etc. The one line I want to point out to you is that alternating male-female inheritance line, because it's a disproportionate X sharing line. So that's me to my dad, to his mum, to her dad, John Campbell, to his mum, Margaret McPherson, to her dad, John McPherson, to his mum, Catherine Mackenzie. And if we look here, I could be sharing 50% or more of my DNA on this X chromosome with my second great grandmother. I could have even inherited 25% or more of it from my fourth great grandmother, Catherine Mackenzie. To put that in perspective, at the fourth great grandparent level, we tend to inherit around 1.5% of our DNA autosomally. So 25 plus is a massive amount on the X chromosome. And that is why we often find that X DNA matches can be much further back in time for the common ancestors than autosomal matches. So going back to Ruth, our example, the next thing I want to do is delve into the traditional research. She didn't have any ancestral surnames and she didn't have a tree uploaded, but I contacted her and she was able to provide some information and I was able to build my own tree for her. We were even able to work out through the matches that it's not her mother's side. So we share in her paternal X chromosome. The next thing you want to do for a match is, since you know it's an X match, eliminate the lines that could not have contributed to her paternal X chromosome. So her paternal grandfather certainly couldn't. John Short certainly couldn't, because that's a male to male line again. So that leaves me with 3 lines on her paternal side to investigate: Mary Ann Dover, Alan Bogle, and Anne McPherson. And of course, that one stood out to me, given that I have that X DNA line with my second great grandmother, Margaret McPherson. Could they be related? Well, it turned out Margaret and Anne were sisters. And I didn't have death details or other details for Anne. So this DNA match helped me fill in missing pieces on my own tree. Another tip: upload to gain X DNA information. Here's my second cousin Howard, who's tested at MyHeritage. And we're sharing 332 centimorgans, an excellent amount of DNA. But if we share anything on the X chromosome, it's not going to be reported here on MyHeritage or on Ancestry or on Living DNA. So in order to see if we share in the X chromosome, Howard would have to upload to Family Tree DNA or GEDmatch. And he uploaded to Family Tree DNA. And lo and behold, we shared 2 whopping segments of X chromosome DNA, totaling 94 centimorgans. If Howard hadn't uploaded elsewhere, we would have missed this amazing X DNA match, which can now be mapped. And just to put that in perspective, a full X chromosome is 196 centimorgans in size. This is the one my mother produced for me. And 94 centimorgans, therefore, equals 48% of my paternal X chromosome that Howard and I share with each other. My main specialism as a professional genealogist and DNA detective is using DNA in combination with traditional research in order to solve unknown ancestor mysteries, especially unknown parentage cases. And this is one of my clients, Megan, anonymized, of course. She contracted me to help identify her birth father, and she tested Ancestry and found that Rita was her top match on the mystery paternal side. And this is what I call a jackpot match, sharing over 1,500 centimorgans. It has to be a grandmother, a granddaughter, an aunt, a niece, or a half sister. And whenever I see 2 women who could be half sisters and sharing in this range, I always want to see how they match on the X chromosome. But of course, Ancestry doesn't provide that. So I got Rita and Megan to upload to GEDmatch. And I used the XDNA one-to-one comparison tool there to see that they actually share an entire X chromosome. Now, a paternal grandmother and granddaughter would share an entire X chromosome because the grandmother provides it to the granddaughter. However, Megan and Rita are only a few years apart in age, so that's an impossibility. And therefore, this proved that they were paternal half-sisters, because paternal half-sisters, of course, share a full X chromosome, since their father only has one to pass down to any daughters he has. So key points: X chromosome matching is included with autosomal DNA tests, but it is not visible on Ancestry, MyHeritage, or Living DNA. You can only inherit X chromosome DNA from specific ancestors, and your gender is a big factor. Women have twice the X men do, and thus many more matches. X DNA can pass through several generations untouched, so often a match on the X is further back than a match on an autosome. Always fill in your own XDNA inheritance chart as reference and narrow down connections to matches by investigating only the lines that could have contributed to their XDNA. Use autosomal and X together to try and identify your common ancestors. Feel free to download the syllabus. All links are in there, and get filling in those inheritance charts. Thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of the RootsTech Connect conference.